Hello, folks. We are at it again. Live at 9, basically. That's what I mean. In any event, the big news of the day. Well, about. But one of the big things that happened is in international news. And that thing is China, which recently passed a new would not use it to go after people who had a history of criticizing the Chinese government. But it has become very clear in the last couple of weeks that, in fact, they are using the new powers to go after folks who have been involved in opposing Communist Party tyranny for years and years and years, and trumping up charges in order to get them now. So why do I bring this up? Well, one, it's terrible what's happening in Hong Kong. It's very, very bad, and the destruction of democracy in Hong Kong is a loss for democracy everywhere, which happens to be backsliding a bit. But the reason I bring this up is because I had a conversation with somebody on Facebook today about Donald Trump. And there was a conversation which went something like this. Donald Trump is going to contest the results of the election. And the person who replied said, Donald Trump would never do that. If he loses the election, he'll just leave. To which I responded, there's the common refrain. Donald Trump would never do X. And lo and behold, X. It is the methodology of dictators and people who would undermine a democratic system to first promise that the things that they are doing will not be used to undermine the democracy. And then immediately after getting the thing that they've been fighting for achieved, be it a bill passed, an executive order issued, power transferred, they will immediately go about undermining the democracy with that win. So I think it's just very important to understand the psychology, and also the psychology of voters and people who sort of let things happen because they assume that it will never get that bad. It always gets that bad at some point. There's always somebody ready to take advantage of that, I suppose, naivete or gullibility of the electorate. But in China's case, people saw this coming. But even in China's case, and let's be very clear about this, China is a dictatorship. They don't have to lie about these things. They can just say, yeah, we're just going to come in here and arrest everybody who's pro-democracy, and nobody could really stop them. But they did it anyway just to pacify people. And now that it's done, and again, they didn't have to pacify people. They just decided to do it because it was a better look. And now that it's done, they're going around just arresting folks. And so I just want to say just to say it aloud, even though perhaps we all have this internal sense, even though Donald Trump may say that he's not trying to take over the country, even though he may say that he's not trying to undermine the election, even though he may say that banning mail-in ballots and destroying the post office are for the integrity of the election, they are not. And if we let him get away with it, we can rest assured that when he has accomplished that goal, he will turn it around against the democratic institutions that sustain our country, and we will be in a worse position than we ever imagined ourselves. So I just wanted to say that because it's not very often that you get to make comparisons between the Chinese and the American government. I mean, for all of our faults, and the United States has plenty of them, we're not a totalitarian, authoritarian regime ruled by a single party that has no respect for the rule of law. But we happen to have somebody in office who kind of embodies that ideal. And so I just think, I just wanted to talk about that. I wanted to vent a bit. If folks have questions about it, I'm obviously happy to have a discussion, though I don't think there's many people who would be watching this that would happen to disagree. Now, there's other things to talk about. For example, Trump's executive order to issue some coronavirus pandemic relief, which is a complete abrogation of the Constitution. And whether or not you believe that action needs to be taken, we simply cannot put aside the idea that there's a separation of powers in order to get something done. And there's also a pretty good argument that the the Republican-controlled branches of government are colluding to prop up Trump's presidency, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, or just as a side effect of trying to propping up a dictatorship by eroding the Constitution. But we'll get to that in just 1 second. I just want to look at these comments that Dorian posted because he loves ragging on the Chinese Communist Party. Hey, Ben, what are your thoughts on the Belarusian election last night? Haven't looked into it, although I'm aware that it happened. And if you were a Democratic activist and you were on Xi's shit list, which place would you be your exile nation of choice? Taiwan, Canada, or the UK? Or would you stay and surely get arrested? I would go to Canada. I would go to the UK because I'd be a Hong Kong resident, and the UK is offering special privileges because Hong Kong used to be a UK colony. Even though the UK is in dire straits when it comes to backsliding into totalitarianism like the United States, and Canada, for all of its merits, happens to be on the doorstep of a highly militant, potentially on the brink of civil war, is across the channel from Europe, and Europe is pretty stable anyway. So there's that. Dorian Key, when does Trump's $400 with PUA? Okay, so now let's talk about the money and the erosion of democracy that Trump has granted us. Although, one last comment, Trump is small fry compared to Xi and Putin. No, he's not. He is nowhere near as talented or competent and authoritarian. All right. I want to dismiss a notion here, which is that in order for an authoritarian to be absolutely devastating to a country and the world, that they have to be, quote, competent. All right. So if you read the book It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis, which I never did, but my mom would never shut up about. And look, I didn't read it because I was like, it can't happen here. I don't know why you want me to read this. My mom, whose family escaped, the Nazis, she didn't grow up under the Nazis, but, she was very, 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 I don't want to say obsessed, but she was always, always conscious and concerned about civil liberties in the United States and the erosion of those liberties because of what our family had been through. Now, whether or not you believe Hitler was a strategic genius, certainly there's evidence that he wasn't. In that book, there is a blustering, bumbling general who basically, you don't need to be super smart to pull off a coup. You just need to be charismatic. You just need, to a segment of the population, you just need to have diehard followers willing to kill for you. And, willing to die for you is maybe the better way of putting it. And if you don't think that Donald Trump, we can debate because we don't have the evidence yet whether he has followers willing to kill for him. Although I think arguably he does. He obviously has followers willing to die for him. We just had a high-profile death, Herman Cain, who believed the president's rhetoric on coronavirus so much that he attended a rally, caught COVID-19, and died recently about it. Yeah, my mom was the smartest. She's my hero, and the reason I'm such a serious civil libertarian is because of her. But I just really want to correct the idea that it takes a mastermind to destroy democratic institutions. What it really takes is a bumbling, I don't want to say oath, but it takes somebody who has zero concern for the institutions of democracy and for the rule of law. And yet, at those things to see where it is that they can go. But honestly, a smart person like, say, Dick Cheney will go about things much more slowly and methodically, much more slowly and methodically, and try to chip away at the rule of law. It really takes somebody who is brazen to come out swinging and to do things that is reasonable to think would get somebody impeached without concern. And either you can be very smart but incredibly brave, stupid, and just keep banging into things like a bull in a china shop. And that, I think, is where Donald Trump falls. And ultimately, it's worse. It's worse because he doesn't even have a conception of how to go about dismantling the United States. It's just that he runs into every restriction, barrels it down, wrestles it to the ground, and kills it. And everybody else just watches in horror, not knowing what to do. But because he doesn't have the capacity to appreciate what's going on, he knows no limits, right? He never pauses to be like, wow, this might be a step too far. Presumably in his mind is the idea that elections are sacrosanct, because even the most oblivious person to the American form of government understands that elections are important. But I think do whatever I want. And he doesn't have to be the strategic mastermind. He just has a different opinion that is our barriers. We just back things which an intelligent person would say, this is going to be dangerous for me to tackle. He simply barges through without a second thought. Now, okay, so then the last thing I'll say is, once you have an idiot doing these things, they simply create a bunch of catastrophes, or catastrophes that beset the population are magnified by their incompetence, which is exactly what we have seen and what we are seeing. And they're left with only a few tools. One is they have found a way to do that. So like Donald Trump, for all of his failure to a subset of the population, because Bernie also has the capacity to excite a segment of the electorate that is just diehard. But the Bernie base is not as diehard for Sanders, but a lot of them are not following Sanders into like the Joe Biden world. Now, I don't want to imply that Bernie bros aren't going to be voting for Joe Biden. Trust me, I know a lot of them, and a lot of them are, and they're out there for Biden. But Trump's core constituency is deadly dedicated to Donald Trump and will do whatever he says and back whoever he wants. And like Steve Bannon is out there occasionally contradicting Trump, but I think those days are really done. And so the problem with Trump is that, and the problem with people who aren't intelligent, but are like destroying the boundaries for the guideposts of democracy, is that once they start doing that, things start getting bad, and then they have to use negative integration, which is basically creating divisions in society. They use negative integration, they scapegoat people, and then they come up with increasingly wild ideas for A, what the problems of societies are, usually ethnic minorities, and B, what the solutions are. Oftentimes eliminate that ethnic minority. And so this was already in Trump's playbook for sure, but as things progress, the increasing problems that the country faces because of the incompetence of the leadership leads to escalation of the things that need to be done to solve the problem. And as those solutions escalate, they generally require more centralization of authority in the leader's hands, and the condemnation and eradication of opposition to that leader, because those people are then identified with the root source of the problem. And that is why stupid people can be really, really, really dangerous when it comes to turning a great country into a kleptocratic authoritarian regime. It doesn't have to be like Emperor Palpatine taking over the galactic Senate, right? That was careful machinations. It can also just be, idiocracy. No, there's got to be a good story. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but where somebody basically lands, they end up in power, and then through some intent, but oftentimes just happenstance and luck, they end up in a situation that they exploit and simply accumulate all the power that's needed. Honestly, I don't even want to say this like a story. You know what a story is? The story is the conspiracy. Conspiracies are almost an example. Now, Caesar was very, very smart. He made up the state. He basically climate insurance and national these things to the together. And here's the deal: it was the federal pandemic period. You got your state's regular unemployment check plus $600 extra from the government. This lapsed in August. Obviously, we're not done with the pandemic. And obviously, we've blown all our money on things that make no sense for dealing with a pandemic, but we won't get into that. Well, like the economy. And some of this degenerative illness in the body, like the United States, and basically long-term growth and success by any metric. Anyway, we're not going to get into that and all those stats tonight because we're trying to tell a story about this pandemic unemployment insurance and how a bumbling oaf ends up becoming a dictator. All right, so continuing on this narrative, because the two houses of Congress couldn't agree, Donald Trump's agency released to American citizens, federal government, the Democrats wanted to pass a spending bill, but that's not a thing anymore. Now, mind you, I want to be very clear about this. If your state doesn't pony up 100, you don't get. But ultimately, and if nothing can happen, Congress, then the president has to act. And if the president has the pretense to act and does really passed off as quote kudos, but that was maybe a month. Not even. That's how our democracy. Fiction. Let's talk about. Let's really get into the meat of what this is doing to democracy. The president does not have any control over funding to FEMA. This is a lot of that. Up and under a single office, the presidency. It didn't take a strategic genius to get there. It simply